And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment of Cowboy State Politics Live from very high above all virile and vacuous forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly and permanently ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Friday. That's right, my friends. It is Friday here at Cowboy State Politics. And I have to tell you, I could not be happier. It has been a long week, even though I was kind of on vacation a little bit. Spent Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday on the mountain, which, by the way, it was very much deserved. I think I'm going to make it sort of a tradition now at Cowboy State Politics that after an election, I take off and go up to the mountains and go fishing a little bit, which I did. We shot a tremendous amount of guns this weekend. I finally figured out how to shoot my .357 Ruger Blackhawk. Now, I know that doesn't seem like it should be that big of a hurdle, but I promise you, my friends, it absolutely is. See, this was a gun that was given to me as a gift, and I've only taken it out and put around through it here or there, and I've never really sat down and practiced with it. You see, the more guns you have, the more guns you shoot, you realize that each one of them has a special ammunition that they like, and they all shoot a little bit differently. You can't pick up one pistol and expect it to shoot the same way as every other gun you have. It's just not the case. It doesn't work that way. And honestly, it matters a great deal what sort of ammunition that you have. And I would highly recommend getting some ammunition from the Wyoming Cartridge Company. Telling you, my friends, all the rounds I went through at the cabin, and there were a lot of them. They all held their pattern just as well as any other ammunition that you'd get off the shelf. So if you're going to the sporting goods store and you're going to buy some ammunition to go shooting, I highly recommend that you go with the Wyoming Cartridge Company ammo. You'll be pleasantly surprised, just like I was. So anyway, I caught some fish, shot some guns. It was a successful trip to the mountain, as they all are. And it makes you understand that even though we live in a political world, and what I do for a living is all politics, so maybe this affects me to a greater degree than some, but getting away from it all, it kind of puts things in a little bit of perspective. The world did not stop turning as I was up at the cabin. It didn't explode. There wasn't any great earth-shattering political events that happened, and everything was pretty well where I left it. So anyway, if you get a chance to take some time off, go get away from it all, and put your affairs in perspective, you should do that, especially since we're in an election year, and it seems like politics is coming at us from every direction. So just make sure that you keep everything in perspective. That being said, I trust that everybody watched the Kamala Harris train wreck dumpster fire that happened on CNN last night. As I've told you before on the program, Christine and I are very much into politics. I don't think that you could be married to me and not be into politics. And so we had to watch it. And mainly what we were listening for was any word salads that were going to happen. And there were a couple of them, though she didn't utter a phrase like this.
What can be unburdened by what has been. What can be unburdened by what has been.
Yeah, there wasn't any of that. I'm sure her handlers took care of all that. But there was a whole bunch of platitudes. And I tried to find some audio for you this morning, and while I could find the whole speech, I just didn't have enough time during show prep to chop it all up for you and give you some sound bites. So I'll make sure I make that happen for Monday. But there were the normal word salads that you would expect from Kamala Harris. Now, here's one, and this is interesting. I think. Let's see here. I think this one was from 2 weeks ago. Check this one out.
I think it's very important, as you have heard from so many incredible leaders, for us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it, to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment as it relates not only to the past, but the future.
What in the heck is she talking about? I don't even think that she knows. It's just insert a bunch of words that sound profound to her. And then she just kind of expects that the rest of us are going to tow right along with her and go along with it. And, Kamala Harris is not an intelligent individual. And here's why you can say that. Because over and over and over, she stumbles over her words. And she doesn't make any sense when she's talking. At least even if you're talking to somebody that is not experienced in public speaking, they can still get their idea across. There might be a whole bunch of ums and ers. Those are called verbal pauses. There might be a bunch of those, but at the very least, you can get across what it is that you're saying. And Kamala Harris can't do that. It's a common failing of people that think they are more intelligent than they are, and I think that we absolutely have some evidence of that. A lot of it, actually. Secondly, the entire interview was pretty well scripted. I know CNN kept saying that, this is live. They kept the little live thing down in the corner of the screen the entire time, but it was all pre-recorded. Maybe the only parts of it that were live is when they cut away so that Dana Bash could explain what was going on. And here's the other thing. In any sort of interview, and take one of mine, for instance, let's say Gail Simmons. Most of the time, I let her talk during that interview, as excruciatingly painful as it was. She continued to talk, and then when she was done, there were a couple of key items that I held her accountable to. Okay, now hold on. What do you mean by that? Explain that. Tell me why that's important. Explain what you're saying. Dana Bash didn't do that. And and let's be honest, she was on a much larger stage than the Gail Simmons interview. So you only get a certain amount of time to talk to these folks. And this is the first interview that Kamala Harris has given since she accepted the nomination for the Democrat nominee for president. This is the only interview that she's given. And so the stakes are pretty high to get whatever points across that you want. Now, if you listen to it, you notice that CNN at least tried to keep up the appearance of holding her accountable. There were a couple of times where Dana Bash sort of pressed her on the whole fracking thing, repeated the question once, and then went back and forth with her. So there was at least the appearance of holding Kamala Harris accountable. But there wasn't anything substantive in there. Nothing that we could sit back and say, okay, this is her plan. At one point, Dana Bash asked her, all right, so what are your plans on day one? That's a general question you ask nominees for president, because you should already have that plan in place. And she couldn't answer the question. There was not one concrete thing that she said that would lead us to believe that she had any sort of plan whatsoever, except, of course, when we were talking with one of her campaign surrogates. Well, not we, but when there was an interview with one of her campaign surrogates. And let me see here. Let me get to my sound bites. And let's see here. Here we go. So take a listen to this. And I guess maybe I should preface this by, let's see if I've got the other soundbite loaded. Now, we've heard the same refrain from a lot of politicians that really don't have any idea what they're talking about. I play Nancy Case on the program a lot when he says, this is a good bill. This is a good bill for Wyoming. Here we go. This one.
This is a good deal for Wyoming. It could be a good deal. We can't even start to figure it out until we pass this bill.
Okay, so we have to pass the bill before we can find out what's in it. And of course, there's the Nancy Pelosi, where she said exactly the same thing. Well, here is one of Kamala Harris's campaign surrogates saying pretty much the same thing. Listen to this.
One last one for you here, Quentin. Day one. We know what President Biden did on day one. He essentially ended the Keystone XL pipeline, took a host of executive actions on immigration. I do not believe we've heard yet from Vice President Harris on what a day one look like for her. What actions might she take on day one if she wins?
Okay, now listen close to what he says. Listen for specifics, because you want to be able to rattle off a list. Just like real quick, any sort of politician, doesn't matter what level they're at, you can ask them, what's the first thing that you're going to do? And if you listen to a lot of my interviews, that question is in there somewhere. Even to some of my friends, Representative Jennings or Pendergraft or John Bear or Chip Diamond, any of them, you'll find that question in there. Okay, so what are you going to do day one? What's the very first thing you're going to do when you walk through those doors? And this should be a question that candidates have already in their mind. It's the number one thing that's on their agenda. It's what they have told every constituent that they've knocked on their door. This should be a no-brainer. And your campaign surrogates, well, first of all, your messaging ought to be right in line all the way down the row. I mean, there should be no daylight between what the people working for you are saying and what you yourself are saying. And let's put this another way too. If you're running for president, you have the highest paid communications experts probably anywhere working for you. And you have essentially an unlimited budget, so there ought to be no reason why you can't come up with the best messaging. And so all of the resources are there. So given all of that, listen to what Kamala Harris's campaign surrogate had to say when asked, all right, what's the day one agenda?
I think you'll have to find out when she rolls out what her day one policies are going to be. Right now, the vice president is focused on making sure that she's rolling out policies to lower costs for families, and that's where our focus is. But you'll have to stay tuned to see what her day one policies are going to be.
Oh, you got to stay tuned. She's going to have to get elected before you know what she's going to do, which I guess that's probably the most honest answer that he could have given, because they're Democrats and they lie, and they're going to say a whole bunch of things to American voters to get them to vote for her. And then, of course, when she's behind the resolute desk, all sorts of things are going to change. So perhaps he was being the most honest that he absolutely could be. But you're going to have to stay tuned to find out what's in it. Holy crap, my friends. Just amazing. And here is probably why, just a couple of examples of why you don't want Kamala Harris saying any of that stuff. Here are her thoughts on, let's see here, fracking and the Green New Deal. Listen to this.
In parts of America that there's cultural antagonism.
No, this is the wrong one. That was a reaction to the speech last night. We'll listen to that in a minute. But let's listen to Kamala Harris's thoughts on inflation. Yet another reason why you don't want her anywhere near a microphone without a teleprompter.
Prices have gone up, and families and individuals are dealing with the realities of the bread costs more, the gas costs more. And we have to understand what that means. That's about the cost of living going up. That's about having to stress and stretch limited resources. That's about a source of stress for families that is not only economic, but is on a daily level, something that is a heavy weight to carry.
Oh, Did that make any sense whatsoever? Does any of that have any sort of, is it in the same ballpark as explaining what inflation is? No, it doesn't. Here she is on Women's History Month.
So during Women's History Month, we celebrate and we honor the women who made history throughout history, who saw what could be unburdened by what had been.
Uh-huh. And she thinks that that is profound. Holy cow, my friends. Well, like I said, on Monday's edition of the program, I'll make sure that I have, a whole bunch of stuff, a bunch of articles, and we'll do a bunch of sound bites from the so-called interview last night. And I think that you're going to find a lot of it is pretty much the same thing that we've heard over and over and over, that there's not anything new that's going on. And if you'll notice during the interview, at least this is one of the things that I picked up on, some of the normal platitudes were there, but not the normal campaign messages that we've heard. During the Democrat convention, all we heard is, this is about joy. Of course, there's no definition of what joy is. And Obama had hope and change, and more vague terms that don't absolutely mean anything. And then before that, it was, well, all these Trump people, they're just weird. They're weird. And it's so weird. They never explained exactly why they're weird or how they are weird. It was just the same assertion that, well, they're weird and we're all about joy, so vote for us. And the truth is that this joy rhetoric is really just an Orwellian attempt to hide the Democrats' hatred. This comes from a piece by Stella Morabito. And let me just quote it to you here. Joy is now the Democrats' official campaign strategy. Of course, joy, in the true sense, resonates with people who are starving for it. But we ought to ask about the deeper purpose of the Harris-Walsh presidential campaign, adopting joy as messaging. Even the New York Times recently offered skepticism, stating that joy is not a political strategy. No, it's not. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that there's a weird trick going on here. Consider thinking of Vice President Kamala Harris's joy shtick as analogous to the joystick used in aircraft and video games. The joystick is all about imposing control, dictating movements and direction. Likewise, the psychological operation behind the Democrats' joy shtick, as opposed to joystick, is about controlling or nudging the direction of an electorate that's profoundly miserable because of the insane amounts of inflation, crime, and social turmoil cultivated under the Democrats' watch. As with all such joy campaigns in the history of modern totalitarianism, they end up tacitly stating that misery is joy. It's like being beckoned into a sadomasochistic relationship in which inflicting and receiving pain is supposed to be pleasurable. Enthusiasm becomes mandatory. Not only is a joy campaign meant to distract attention from the track record of tyrants, but with media control, it imposes an Orwellian anti-definition, similar to the novel 1984's delusional slogan that freedom is slavery, or like the passage in Isaiah 5:20 about those who would call light darkness and darkness light, those who would call good evil and evil good. It is exactly what the Democrats and Kamala Harris are doing, trying to convince you that their policies, those of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, are nothing but joy, when in fact, the only thing that they have created in America is misery. And if we elect Kamala Harris, that is exactly what we're going to continue to get. Remember, freedom is slavery, misery is joy. And anytime the Democrats are around, you can be sure that everything they're saying means exactly the opposite. More after the break. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics live every Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a better source of news, entertainment, and commentary than on Cowboy State Politics Live. You know, the program you're listening to right now. And frankly, why would you want to look anywhere else anyway? Let's be honest, only a liberal redcoat Tommy would do that. And if you want to listen to my podcast, you can find it at cowboystatepolitics.com or anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest way is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. If your name is Sleepy Joe Biden and you can't remember if you put socks on this morning or not, well, I can't really help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president of the United States. And now, back to the program. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. That's right, my friends. Nobody else can come close to Cowboy State Politics. And it's for one simple reason. We focus on the facts here, the clear, unafraid, unvarnished truth. And that's how I built this podcast and this program. And it's with the truth. And that's all you have to do. If you can speak the truth, politicians will be scared of you. And the media, well, as has been my experience, they run from the truth. So anyway, that's what you're going to get here at Cowboy State Politics. Now, before the break, we were talking about the scripted telecommercial or infomercial known as the Kamala Harris interview. And, you know, they started out the thing and they called it a watershed moment. Really? So a watershed moment, an interview. One interview, the only interview you've done since you've been anointed the Democrat nominee for the president of the United States. That is a watershed moment. Interesting. Well, now I've given you some perspective from a couple of other media outlets. Let's get a couple more in here, and I've got one from a decidedly conservative group, The Blaze. Now, listen to this. Harris says her values remain the same despite multiple flip-flops. Okay, that's the other thing that I noticed in the speech. I mean, there were a lot of things, but she kept repeating herself that my values haven't changed. My stances haven't changed. And then all of a sudden, in the same breath, she would say things like, well, absolutely, I'm in favor of fracking. Well, if your values haven't changed, that means that you can lie and that you're not in favor of fracking, and that anything you say in that interview, we should just completely disregard. Because remember, her values haven't changed. And I quote from The Blaze, Vice President Kamala Harris assured the left wing of the Democrat Party that her values on issues like energy independence and health care did not change, despite saying that she no longer supports her past statements. Harris's interview with CNN's Dana Bash was her first interview after President Joe Biden dropped out of the race when it was clear that he was unlikely to win this year's election. During the interview, Harris was accompanied by her running mate, Minnesota Governor, war hero Tim Walz. Now, of course, I'm being sarcastic there because Walz was never been in war. Quote, my value around what we need to do to secure our border, that value has not changed. So Kamala Harris was put in charge of the border. She was called basically the border czar by just about everybody in the administration, including Joe Biden and people in the media. And then all of a sudden, oh, no, I was never the border czar. But she's been in favor of doing nothing the southern border, not restricting the influx of illegal immigrants into this country. She's done nothing to stop any of it. So when Kamala Harris says, my values haven't changed, you could take her at her word. Back to the article. Quote, and this is Kamala Harris. Generally speaking, how should voters look at some of the changes that you've... Oh, this is Dana Bash. Excuse me. How should voters look at some of the changes that you've made, that you've explained some here in your policy? Okay, she never explained the policy, but anyway. Is it because you were running for president in the Democratic primary? And should they feel comfortable and confident that what you're saying now is going to be your policy moving forward? Now, here's Kamala's response. Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed. You mentioned the Green New Deal. I have always believed, and I've worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics. And this is the big word salad that I tried really hard to find this morning, that I couldn't find just that soundbite. Don't worry, I'll have it for you on Monday. Anyway, here it is. That it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. Is that anything like this?
It's very important, as you have heard from so many incredible leaders. For us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it, to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment as it relates not only to the past, but the future.
Okay, so I don't know what that means, and I don't know what she's saying to Dana Bash here. But in any case, she says we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. We did that in the Inflation Reduction Act. So here she is openly admitting that the Inflation Reduction Act really didn't have anything to do with reducing inflation. It was the Green New Deal, because that's what she said in the prefatory claim sentence. So the prefatory claim is, I have always worked on the Green New Deal. And then she switches to the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's the secondary claim in the argument. So the two are working together. Okay. Don't let her slip by and say, oh, no, the two are separate, because they're not. Politicians mean things. Words mean things.
2 plus 2 is 4, not 5 if you want it to be 5. And this is not to be discriminatory. This is to stand up for language. Words mean things.
Words do mean things, and word choice is very, very important. So when she mentions both the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act, it's done on purpose, though in her addled brain, by addled, I mean absolutely not intellectual at all, not able to put together cogent sentences in in any forum. But in her mind, they make sense, because she knows deep down that the Inflation Reduction Act and the Green New Deal are one and the same. So anyway, she's admitted it. Let her continue here. Quote, my value around what we need to do to secure our border. That value has not changed. I spent 2 terms as the Attorney General of California prosecuting transnational criminal organizations. All right, so there's an article out. Oh man, I should have printed it out, but during the break, I'll go see if I can find it. But she didn't even really prosecute transnational criminal organizations. Now, she was the Attorney General, and some of the people in her office prosecuted them. So the best that Kamala Harris could say is that she oversaw the prosecution of transnational corporations, but it was not Kamala Harris. And so, again, words mean things. Anyway, she says, I spent 2 terms as the Attorney General prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, violations of American laws regarding the illegal passage of guns, drugs, and human beings across the border. My values have not changed. Okay, so all of that is pretty much bullcrap. And when she says my values have not changed, take her at her word. Don't even think that this is a misstep, because it's not. Harris did not answer Bash's question, though Bash stated afterward that Harris gave the broad answer and promised that they got into specific examples of her supposed changes in her policy positions elsewhere in the interview. But if they did, CNN did not air them. And, the other big problem with that interview, and I mean, there are lots of them, is that the whole thing was not played end to end. And that is a red flag right there. That's the number one thing that you should look at, is if an interview is not played end to end, there's some things that were cut out. And that's the only reason why you would do that. Now, of course, during broadcast TV, you have to have time for breaks, but you could pick up where you left off. You might hear the commentator say something to the effect of, before the break, we were talking about this. We're going to back it up a little bit so you can get everything in context, and then we're going to continue with the interview. Way that nothing has been cut out. Now, on Cowboy State Politics, you'll sometimes, not very often, but sometimes I'll do that. If it's a really long interview and I don't really want to go for 2 hours, I'll just take different snippets out of it and I'll play it. But it's very clear on the program what I'm doing. That, okay, so this is a really long interview, and I've decided we're just going to take it a piece at a time. Here's the first section, and then let's talk about it. I make it clear to the audience that that's what's happening. CNN didn't do that. In fact, they did exactly the opposite of what you would expect. Well, actually, we would totally expect that CNN would butcher up an interview and then claim that it was the whole thing. In fact, they claimed that it was real, that it was live the entire time, which, of course, it wasn't. Coming up, we're going to see what the New York Times had to say about it. And this one's interesting because, of course, the New York Times is not a conservative organization. So we'll do that after the break. It's spring in the Cowboy State, or as Albert Summers likes to say, spring-ish. Time to get the motorcycle out of the garage, time to go up the mountain, time to get outside and tromp around. And when you're doing that, you still want to make sure that you take care of your feet. The best way that you can do that is order a pair of Kenai boot socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. I know, your mama always told you that wool socks are only to be worn during the winter. But times have changed, my friends. The Kenai boot socks from the Buffalo Wool Company will not only keep your feet nice and toasty warm, they'll keep them cool and dry in the summer. Trust me, these are the most incredible socks that you're ever going to put on your feet. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. You're definitely not going to be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Watch out. Cowboy State Politics is only going to get stronger. The program is only going to continue to expand from every corner of this state to every state in the union. It's Cowboy State Politics, and I'm the host, David Iverson. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone, doing what I was born to do each and every day with talent given to me by God himself. Yes, sir, my friends. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, all around. We have to be very thankful for the gifts that we have been given and use them, because if we don't, we're not doing justice to the big guy. So that's why I sit here and I do what I do. Now, before all program long, we've been talking about that ridiculous interview on CNN, and as we should, it's the only one that we can really analyze and go through, and that in and of itself is important. That nobody in her campaign trusts her enough to let her alone in her own interview, to leave her alone with a hot microphone, because they're terrified of what's going to come out of her mouth. And they should be, because when she says stuff like, let's see if I got another one here. Well, I don't actually have one queued up, but she says all sorts of crazy stuff, like
What can be unburdened by what has been. What can be unburdened by what has been.
yeah, that's the phrase that she uses over and over and over. And apparently she thinks it's important, but it's the dumbest thing that I've ever heard. And it's almost like she thought about it, when she first started running for politics, and she thought, this is going to be my catchphrase. This is going to be it. But it's totally contrived. If you compare, like, we can't really compare Kamala Harris to Ronald Reagan, but let's just take Ronald Reagan, for instance. He had a lot of things that he said that, and a lot of them is they spend like drunken sailors. But that would be unfair to drunken sailors because the sailors are spending their own money. Great quotation. A lot of people laugh when he, in a debate, he said, I wasn't going to make his youth and inexperience an issue in this campaign. But there were a lot of things, but all of those happened organically. And the difference here with Kamala Harris is that nothing happens organically. Everything is contrived, and poor results that come out of it just show you what a poor politician that she actually is. And even the New York Times is starting to come around. Now, the New York Times is used to be the paper of record, the gray old lady, but it is one big liberal ball of wax. And there's a columnist named Brett Stevens. He's got a piece out this morning that's entitled "A Vague, Vacuous TV Interview That Didn't Help Kamala Harris." Let's dig into it. And I quote, Kamala Harris didn't hurt herself in her interview this week with CNN's Dana Bash. She didn't particularly help herself either. On the positive side of things, she came across as warm, relatable, and, to recall Barack Obama's famous 2008 exchange with Hillary Clinton, more than likable enough. Harris refused to be baited into the identity politics trap, emphasizing that she was running for president for, quote, all Americans, regardless of race and gender. But of course, we know that that's much bullcrap, because Kamala Harris, and she's like the queen of DEI. So, again, a lot of this is you have to take with a grain of salt. And the title is probably one of the more important parts: vacuous. Vacuous means that you're kind of devoid of any sort of emotions, flat. I mean, it's you should completely disregard everything. But Stevens continues, and she had a nice line of attack against Donald Trump, observing the distinction between leaders who measure their strength according to whom they beat down, as opposed to who they hold up. I think measure it by who you lift up. That's how she put it. And it's completely not true. However, if you're a Democrat, it might have just enough truth in it to where it might kind of make sense a little bit. Because Donald Trump takes the attack straight to politicians, and if you consider that beating somebody down, well, then I mean it might kind of ring true if you're a Democrat. But the truth is, and here's something that I was reading over the weekend up at the cabin, is that since the 1950s, there has been an aversion to the truth. And at some point, and I don't know when this was, but at some point, telling the truth about a political candidate, or anybody for that matter, began to seem more like an attack than it was to just say the plain, honest truth. That you're attacking their character, you're making them feel bad, you're hurting their feelings by telling the truth about them. Well, the truth is simply that. It's the truth. And the only way that we get to any sort of workable policy or get good leaders in place is if we know the truth about them. But of course, they have an aversion to it, which is why you get all these vacuous statements like Kamala Harris said. So Stevens continues here. Less positive. She was vague, quote, she was vague to the point of vacuous. She struggled to give straight answers to shifting positions on fracking and border security, other than to say, quote, my values have not changed. Well, fine. But she evaded the question and why it took the Biden administration more than 3 years to gain better control of the border, which it ultimately did. Okay, this is the Democrat part of the New York Times talking here, which it ultimately did through an executive order that could have been been in place years earlier. It also didn't answer the question of why she reversed her former policy positions or whether she has higher values than other than political expediency. And that might be the headline of the day that goes unstated, that the only value she has is to political expediency. Quote, Harris also relied on a few talking points that may not serve her well in the next 2 months. She mentioned price gouging, but as Americans probably won't believe that grocery store chains, which with razor thin profit margins, are the real culprits when it comes to their rising food bills, her $100 billion plan to give first time homeowners $25,000 in down payment support would mainly be an incentive for the higher income or ever higher home prices. Even Trump may be smart enough to explain just how inflationary the gimmick should be. A bigger weakness, and I mean, okay, so keep in mind, this is the New York Times. A bigger weakness in the interview was the presence of Harris's running mate, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Though he delivered a fine speech at the Democratic National Convention, brightly enhanced by his cheering son, Gus, he was transparently evasive in answering Bash's questions about his misstatement about his military service, false claims about his DUI arrest, and misleading statements about his family's fertility treatments. If there are other lies or untruths in Wall's record, the campaign ought to get ahead of them now. As for Bash, and here you go, here's more liberal talking points here. As for Bash, she is an intelligent and insistent reporter who isn't afraid to ask a follow-up question when she gets flighty answers. Flirty works too. There was too much fluff in this interview, so laid to rest doubts about Harris's readiness for the highest office. For questions next time, please. So, from the New York Times, that's pretty high criticism. And, you would expect those folks over at the old gray lady to be more lauding of Kamala Harris, to be more affectionate towards her. Not this time around, though. You have the New York Times going after her, and rightfully they should. Absolutely. But it's not just the interview. It's her whole campaign and her time in office. From the Washington Free Beacon, an article entitled Kamala Harris's Frankenstein Campaign Team Sparks Internal Tension. Now, we've heard for a long time that the White House, at least the part that Kamala Harris controls, has been an S show, an Adam Schiff show, because it has. People have quit. She's fired a whole bunch of them. There's been numerous reports that she is a monster to work with, because she's incompetent. And when incompetent people surround themselves with people who know what they're doing and are effective at their jobs, it makes the person who's in charge look bad because they're not the person doing anything. And so, hence the tension in that office. And I quote, as the mainstream media continues to paint Kamala Harris's campaign as joyous and full of good vibes, internally, the vice president's Frankenstein campaign team has become an unwieldy group rife with tension, campaign aides told Axios. Now, Axios is the TMZ of the political world. If you want to know some dirt on people, on celebrities, you go to TMZ. They probably got the dirt on them. It was TMZ that came out with the famous audio from Trump talking about women, the one that they tried to use to derail his campaign. So TMZ, they're the more gossipy journalism in the celebrity world, and Axios is the same thing in the political world. After Joe Biden abruptly ended his re-election campaign in July and endorsed his Vice President Harris, she pieced together a campaign team of competing factions, including top Biden officials, notable staffers from Barack Obama's re-election campaign, and her own aides. This Frankenstein team has sparked internal concerns about its cohesiveness. 6 people involved in the campaign told Axios. Unlike Biden's campaign, which had a limited number of long-serving aides making major decisions, the novice Harris campaign has become a patched-together team with rival powers. The entanglement of these different entities has led to many people feeling a real lack of role clarity. Harris's internal staff tension stems from her larger struggle to simultaneously support her boss's administration and distance herself from its failures. She doesn't want to push Biden aides aside, but also doesn't want to she also wants to implement her own strategy, which has led to confusion about who is in charge. Harris not only changed the personnel of Biden's campaign, but also its messaging. And some Biden aides are frustrated that they must defend Harris's support of far left issues such as Medicare for all and banning fracking. All of the Biden campaign aides know that those policies are not going to play, and they're going to fall as flat as a pancake that I cooked on the mountain this weekend. They're just not going to work. But you have a campaign team that is cobbled together from all different sources. And the truth is, they all have competing interests. So there's no reason to assume that any of them are going to work together. The truth is, not going to. And we are going to be the beneficiaries of all of the fallout that's coming. More after the break.
Talks a bit about 7 chicks from it would be long it would be long like the minutes.
You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a selection of better news, entertainment, and commentary than right here on the Independence Network, with great voices like Joey Carenti from Just Blame Joey, Ken Pendergraft from The Ramble Room, Tom Kelly from Wide Right Turn, and the lovely Christine from The Hair Affair. And of course, my program, Cowboy State Politics, Wyoming's most listened to political program. Also, don't forget to check out the articles section at the website, independencenetwork.us. It's loaded with op-eds, commentary, and news from all around the Cowboy State. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden, and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program.
I remember I was 8 years old with a basic waiting on the radio. From long night, play black and black. I want to be so long repeat. From the and I'm not sitting. That's with the Christie. She took it back to the paradise city. Then critical creed. Guitar cracks some dust. Back into the beats, the bass strong. Still something I don't have show in the second row, which is what on its own. Still something I'm ready to go. When the lights go down, the crowd cheers about the gold and the road. Sweet to it's all in the big Coliseum. No dancing, no lip syncing. I tell you this, don't fight, feel it.
Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson on Cowboy State Politics Live, Wyoming's conservative voice. Now, before the break, rather, we were talking about Kamala Harris, and we've been pounding the dog out of her to just talk about that interview and how terrible of a candidate she is, and it's for a lot of different reasons. First of all, she's just pretty much unintelligent and hasn't, I don't think, had an original thought that anybody wants to hear in her entire political career. That's why everything is so contrived when it comes out of their mouth. And it's funny. Usually in politics, a lot of things are scripted, right? I mean, you get speech writers to write your speech, and politicians have teleprompters. Maybe not so much in Wyoming, but other places they certainly do. But at the same time, you have to have natural moments. You have to see exactly who the candidate is. You have to see who the politician is to see how they react under pressure, and that's why debates are so important. So there's no teleprompters, and there have been controversies in the past where maybe somebody's had an earpiece in where they're listening to somebody, giving them hints or whatever. But it's super important to find out how they react under real pressure, because that pressure is going to come. Absolutely. There is no doubt about it. And with Kamala Harris, it's really hard. I think it would be really hard to be on her campaign. So because things like this happen. Check this out.
Well, I was in a stroller. And so I was out there, and in fact, my mother used to have a very funny story. I was fussing, and she said, "Kamala, what do you want?" And I said, and this is how she would say it. And she said, "Kamala, what do you want?" And I said, "Freedom." No.
Okay, so that's not even true. Okay? That is a story that was told by MLK. By the way, you missed 8/28. That was 2 days ago. I was on the mountain, but that was the 8/28 was the anniversary of his "I Have a Dream" speech on the National Mall. Interesting that would pass by, and I would play that. But anyway, that's not even a true story from Kamala Harris. That was first told by Martin Luther King Jr. Let's see here. What else we got here? I went and grabbed some different sound bites. Here's kind of a montage. And I'm not going to play much of it because I want to get to some other news before we end the program, but just check this out.
And that's what our election is about. Our election is about understanding the importance of this beautiful country of ours in terms of what we stand for around the globe as a democracy. As a democracy, we know there's a duality to the nature of democracy. On the one hand, incredible strength when it is intent, what it does for its people to protect and defend their rights, their liberty, and their freedom. Incredibly strong and incredibly fragile.
What does that mean? It's strong, it's incredibly strong, but it's incredibly fragile. You see, nothing about Kamala Harris is authentic. And that is probably her biggest failing. She's not intelligent enough to come up with an original thought, and she tries to repeat the stories that she thinks will resonate. And the truth is, anytime you try to fool voters, they're going to know, which is the reason why she comes off as stupid as she does. Anyway, well, that's enough Kamala Harris. We've got about looks like 7 minutes left in the program, and there's a couple other things that I want to get to. The results of Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom's policies in California. Now, if you've ever known a real businessman, they're in it to make money, and they're not going to do anything that is going to tax their bottom line. Interesting that I should use that phrase, because corporations don't pay taxes. And when people like Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom and Joe Biden increase taxes, what ends up happening is companies increase their prices to cover that tax burden. So really, the people who pay taxes are the folks that buy the goods. I mean, that's just an easy way to think about macro and micro economics. It's no different than your checkbook, right? If you have to pay more for a product, you're going to buy less of it. And if you have a limited income, that's absolutely true. Well, Elon Musk is making good on his promise to shut down X and to move SpaceX out of California. And this is from the New York Post this morning. Quote, the date that Elon Musk's social media site formerly known as Twitter, will officially shutter its longtime San Francisco headquarters, and that time has been set. A source familiar told Fortune magazine that X informed employees in an email on Thursday that the office on Market Street would close on September 13th. Interesting day. Yeah, well, first of all, it's my birthday, September 13th, but it also happens to fall on a Friday this year. So, by the way, if you've been thinking about, getting me a birthday present, you don't have to. You could send them to the Cowboy State Politics Studio at 1783 Poplar Trail if you're so interested. But what maybe one of the biggest presents I'll get is a big middle finger from Elon Musk to Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris. But he's closing the Twitter headquarters on September 13th. Musk announced last month that he would move the global headquarters of X and SpaceX out of California after Governor Gavin Newsom signed a bill prohibiting schools from notifying parents of their children's gender identity. That's a bill that we just passed the opposite of that bill in Wyoming in the last session, that parents absolutely have to be informed of any change in their child's medical status. Musk said at the time that X's headquarters would move to Austin, Texas, while he also announced that SpaceX would relocate its headquarters from Hawthorne, California to Starbase, Texas. He cited the gender identity law as being the final straw and attributed the move to, quote, this law and many others that preceded it, attacking both families and companies. Musk has been critical of several of California's policies over the years as he migrates his companies to business-friendly Texas. The Tesla CEO officially moved the electric vehicle giant's global headquarters from California to Austin in late 2021, after tension with California's government over stringent COVID-19 regulations. So, While the article clearly says that Musk is the final straw was the law about gender identity and schools not informing parents, probably more likely is the really high taxes in California. No businessman is going to put up with more of his money going to the government with diminishing returns. And that's the whole thing, my friends. When it affects the bottom line, you have to protect it. And if your company is in a state with high taxes and high regulations, that's going to be your biggest reason for moving your business. However, if your personal values don't line up with those of the state and you have the means to move, you absolutely should. Think about Weatherby Firearms moving to Sheridan, Wyoming. Of course, Wyoming is a much more firearm-friendly place, and it makes sense that Weatherby moved their headquarters here, or at least one of their manufacturing outlets here. So, it's not a surprise that Musk moved his operation, but I think that it's absolutely a good thing. The more big business moves out of California, the better. And with Twitter moving out, it's one of the first major we used to call them telecom companies, but I think Silicon Valley companies, technology, internet based, whatever you want to call them. That's significant moving out of California because that's, kind of the hotbed of all of our technology industries. But a good thing for Elon Musk and a good thing for the rest of us, I suppose. And then this last story, we've got about 2.5 minutes left in the program. Probably going to have to cover this one a little bit on Monday. From the Daily Caller, the Biden administration looks to open up 31 million acres for solar after locking up oil and gas in huge swaths of Alaska. Where else did they lock up oil and gas and coal development? Right here in the Cowboy State. So the reason I pulled this article is it might give you a foreshadowing of what the Biden administration has planned for the great Cowboy State, that we're not going to be doing any more oil and gas development. And so we're going to put up a whole bunch of solar panels and wind turbines. A stupid move, my friends. But I think that this article might give us some foreshadowing of what is about to happen. Anyway, I don't really have enough time to get into it today, but I'll go ahead and put this on the top of the stack for Monday, and we'll talk about it. Well, we've come to the end of another busy broadcast hour here on the program, my friends. There is a lot of stuff that's going on politically in the Cowboy State. We just got through the primary, and most people tend to think that the primary is the big time election in Wyoming, and it is. That's where most of the contests are decided, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other races. Wyophile and the Cowboy State Daily have been going on and on about how all of these people who got through the primary are going to be challenged. Now, there are fewer of them, which you can find those on the Secretary of State's website. Bruce Burns up in House 51 decided that he's not going to challenge Lori Bratton, a wise decision on his part. But, that one has more implications to it than just the House race. It was Bruce Burns not wanting to get embarrassed by his losing his precinct seat along with all the other stuff. So anyway, I mean, it's there's a whole bunch of political drama that's happening, and we're going to cover it all here on Cowboy State Politics. But for this Friday, have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. From the base of the Bighorns, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State.